Imagine spending 20 years behind bars, knowing your days are numbered, and when you finally get one last wish, you don't ask for money, freedom, or even food. Instead, you ask for something so simple, yet so powerful, it left a Texas police officer in tears. This true story will shock you, and it all begins with a dying prisoner's final request. If this story moved you, hit like, share it, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Not every story about a police officer and a prisoner ends in violence, anger, or fear. Sometimes, in the most unexpected ways, it ends in humanity. This isn't a story about a daring escape or a dramatic shootout. It isn't about handcuffs, courtrooms, or prison riots. Instead, it's about something far more powerful: compassion. At the heart of this story is Officer Maria Sanchez, a female police officer in Texas who had built her reputation on discipline, fairness, and courage. She had faced dangerous criminals, worked long nights, and carried the heavy responsibility of protecting her community. But despite all the badges, laws, and rules that defined her career, she would soon learn that the greatest test of her character was not about how she handled danger, but how she handled kindness. On the other side of this story was a man most people had forgotten about, a prisoner. His name was Daniel Miller, and for many years, his life had been reduced to prison walls, gray uniforms, and a number instead of a name. To society, he was just another inmate. But to Maria, and soon to the world, he would become the man with a wish so unusual, so quietly powerful, that it left everyone speechless. When people hear about a prisoner's last wish, they usually imagine something predictable. Maybe a huge meal, steak, fried chicken, or ice cream. Maybe a chance to listen to one last song, or a phone call to a loved one. These are the kinds of requests that correctional officers expect. Simple comforts before the end of the line. But Daniel's wish was different. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about freedom. And it wasn't anything anyone could have guessed. When Maria first heard it, she froze. For a moment, she didn't even know what to say. How could a request so small carry such heavy meaning? And why, after everything he had done, did it feel impossible to deny him this final act of mercy? What made this moment even more powerful was Maria's own internal struggle. As a police officer, her job was to enforce the law, to ensure that justice was carried out. Compassion wasn't part of the training manual. Yet, staring into the eyes of a man who had nothing left to lose, she began to feel something she hadn't expected: empathy. It's easy to look at a prisoner and see only the crime. But in that moment, Maria didn't see just an inmate. She saw a human being, tired, fragile, and holding on to one last thread of dignity. And that's what makes this story so extraordinary. Because what Daniel asked for wasn't something grand or dramatic. It wasn't something you could buy or replace. It was something priceless, something that connected directly to the human soul. So what was this shocking request? What could possibly make a hardened officer pause, push against the system, and risk criticism just to grant it? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning to understand who Daniel was, what he had lost, and why his final wish would touch the hearts of millions. The prisoner at the center of this story was Daniel Miller, a man in his mid-40s who had spent much of his adult life behind the cold, concrete walls of a Texas state prison. Daniel was not a name that ever made the headlines. He wasn't a notorious gangster or a mastermind criminal. In fact, his story was painfully ordinary, an ordinary man who had made extraordinary mistakes. Like many who end up in prison, Daniel's life had been a chain reaction of wrong turns. He had grown up in a small Texas town where opportunities were limited and temptations were plenty. Bad choices, bad company, and a single reckless decision one night landed him behind bars. The details of his crime were serious enough to cost him his freedom, but not enough to make him a monster in the eyes of the world. To most, he was just another inmate serving out his time, waiting for the calendar pages to finally set him free. But life had other plans. As the years went by, Daniel's body began to betray him. At first, it was small things: constant fatigue, aches that never went away, a cough that wouldn't stop. But then came the hospital visits, the medical tests, and finally, the diagnosis that changed everything. Daniel had a terminal illness. The doctors gave him only a few months to live. Prison life is already hard, but for Daniel, it became a ticking clock. Every day was borrowed time. Every night a reminder that the end was coming closer. Inside the prison, word spread quickly. Inmates who once saw him as just another man in a cell began to treat him differently. Some offered him quiet respect. Others kept their distance, unsure how to deal with the reality of a dying man in their midst. And the guards, those hardened officers who rarely let emotion slip through their armor. Even they couldn't ignore the frailty in Daniel's steps, the way he struggled to breathe, the way his once strong frame seemed to shrink with every passing week. Under Texas law, prisoners with a terminal illness can sometimes make a final request, a gesture of humanity offered to those who are nearing the end. It isn't a promise of freedom. It isn't a rewriting of the past. Instead, it's a simple chance for dignity, for one last piece of comfort before life fades away. For most inmates, the requests were predictable. They wanted food, greasy burgers stacked high, buckets of fried chicken, a slice of pecan pie, or a tub of ice cream. Food has always been a symbol of comfort, a taste of freedom in a place where choices are stripped away. But Daniel wasn't interested in food. He didn't ask for steak or cake. He didn't care about soda or candy. What he longed for was something deeper, something that couldn't be served on a plate or ordered from a menu. His request would cut through the walls of that prison and touch everyone who heard it. It was a request that carried the weight of longing, regret, and a desperate need for one final glimpse of beauty before death. And when he finally spoke his wish out loud, even the toughest officers stopped in their tracks. Because it wasn't just the prisoner's last request, it was a reminder of what it truly means to be human. When Officer Maria Sanchez was first assigned to handle Daniel Miller's final request, she treated it like any other duty. She had overseen these situations before, and they were usually straightforward. Most inmates asked for food: greasy hamburgers stacked with cheese, a plate of fried chicken with extra gravy, or a slice of chocolate cake that reminded them of childhood. Some requested music, a chance to hear a country ballad or an old gospel hymn before they left the world behind. So, when Maria sat across from Daniel in the small, gray-walled room where inmates shared their requests, she expected the same. She even had a pen ready to write it down, prepared for something simple and easy to approve. But when Daniel finally spoke, the words caught her completely off guard. With a quiet, almost trembling voice, he said, "I just want to feel the outside one last time. Not the prison yard, not behind fences, but a real open space. I want to see the Texas sunset, just once more before I die." The room fell silent. Maria blinked, thinking she had misheard him. Of all the things he could have asked for, steak, music, candy, a phone call, he asked for a sunset. At first, she didn't know what to say. On the surface, it sounded so simple. But in reality, it was nearly impossible. Prisoners weren't just taken outside the compound. The rules were ironclad, the risks enormous. What if he tried to escape? What if something went wrong? Every officer in the facility knew that moving a prisoner beyond the fences was a security nightmare waiting to happen. Maria tried to keep her voice steady as she explained the difficulty. "Daniel, you know that's not how this works. It's not like we can just walk you out of here. There are rules." But Daniel didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet resignation. "I know," he whispered, "but that's all I want. Just the sunset. One more time." There was something in the way he said it that struck her to the core. His voice wasn't filled with anger or entitlement or even hope. It was filled with peace. He wasn't asking for freedom. He wasn't trying to cheat the system. He was asking for something deeply human. Maria had spent years seeing prisoners at their worst: angry, violent, manipulative. But in that moment, looking at Daniel, she didn't see an inmate. She saw a man facing the end of his life with nothing but a small, fragile wish. That night, as Maria drove home, the request echoed in her head. She couldn't shake the image of a dying man longing for something as ordinary, and yet as extraordinary, as a sunset. Most people take it for granted. We see the sun dip below the horizon almost every day. But for Daniel, it had been decades since he'd seen it outside the prison fences. It would have been easy for Maria to say no, to dismiss it as against the rules. But something inside her refused to let go. For the first time in her career, she felt a conflict between the uniform she wore and the human heart beating beneath it. And that was the moment she made a choice. A choice that would challenge the system, stir debate among her colleagues, and change both of their lives forever. After weeks of endless paperwork, tense conversations, and skeptical looks from her colleagues, Officer Maria Sanchez finally received the green light. The approval had come with strict conditions. Multiple guards would accompany them, medical staff had to be on alert, and the outing would be brief. Some officers rolled their eyes, calling it a waste of time. Others warned her that bending rules, even for compassion, was dangerous. But Maria didn't waver. Deep inside, she knew this moment wasn't just about Daniel. It was about proving that even within the toughest walls of a prison, humanity could still shine through. The day finally arrived. It was a warm Texas evening, the kind of evening where the air carried a soft breeze and the sky slowly transformed into a canvas of fire and gold. Daniel, frail and thin from his illness, was carefully escorted out of the prison gates. Shackles were removed for safety, but guards stood close, watchful and ready. For Daniel, however, escape wasn't even a thought. He didn't want freedom. He just wanted a sunset. As he stepped onto a quiet patch of land just beyond the facility, he froze. His shoes touched grass for the first time in nearly 20 years. The smell of earth and wildflowers drifted through the air, since he had almost forgotten existed. For a long moment, Daniel didn't move. He just stood still, breathing deeply, as if trying to absorb every detail of this forgotten world. Then, slowly, his head tilted back, and his eyes fixed on the sky. The horizon was painted with streaks of orange, pink, and deep purple. The sun, glowing like a burning ember, began its slow descent. It wasn't just beautiful, it was overwhelming. Tears welled up in Daniel's eyes, and before anyone could speak, they began streaming down his face. His voice cracked as he whispered to Officer Sanchez, "I don't deserve this kindness, but thank you. This is more than I ever dreamed of." Those words pierced the silence. Even the guards, hardened by years of dealing with inmates, shifted uncomfortably, their tough exteriors softening in that moment. They weren't watching a prisoner anymore. They were watching a man saying goodbye to the world. Daniel sank slowly to the ground, sitting cross-legged on the grass. He stretched out his trembling hands, running his fingers through the blades as if they were treasures. The simple touch of the earth beneath him brought a peace he hadn't felt in decades. For Maria, standing just a few feet away, the moment was transformative. She had always believed in justice, in order, in the importance of rules. But now, she saw clearly that her badge carried something more powerful, the responsibility to preserve dignity. Watching Daniel watch the sunset, she realized that true service wasn't only about punishment, it was about compassion. As the sun finally slipped below the horizon, the sky dimmed into twilight. Daniel's tears slowed, replaced by a faint smile. For him, that sunset was not just light in the sky. It was freedom, forgiveness, and peace, all wrapped into one final memory. Maria would never forget the look on his face. That night, she carried it with her like a silent reminder. Sometimes, the greatest victories in law enforcement don't come from catching criminals, but from honoring their humanity in the end. A few weeks after that unforgettable evening, Daniel Miller quietly passed away in a prison hospital. His final days were spent in a sterile room under the constant hum of machines, but unlike many others, he didn't leave the world in bitterness. He carried with him the memory of the open sky, the smell of grass, and the warmth of a Texas sunset, the gift Officer Maria Sanchez had fought to give him. But Daniel's story didn't end with his passing. In fact, that was just the beginning. Within the prison, word of his final wish spread quickly. Officers who had initially criticized the decision to grant it began to speak of it with respect. Hardened guards, who rarely discussed emotions, found themselves quietly reflecting on what they had witnessed. For years, they'd seen inmates as numbers, case files, or problems to manage. But Daniel's wish reminded them that every man behind bars was still a human being, capable of pain, regret, and longing. Soon, the story made its way beyond prison walls. A local news station picked it up, then a regional paper, and before long, it reached audiences across the state. People were surprised, not by Daniel's illness or his death, but by the simplicity of what he had asked for. He hadn't wanted riches, revenge, or even freedom. All he wanted was a sunset, something most people can see every single day, yet rarely stop to appreciate. The story sparked debates in communities, classrooms, and even within law enforcement circles. Some argued that criminals didn't deserve compassion, but many more were moved by the idea that even someone who had stumbled so badly in life could still be granted dignity in their final days. Churches used it in sermons, teachers used it as a lesson in empathy, and ordinary people found themselves thinking twice before judging others too quickly. For Officer Sanchez, the impact was deeply personal. That single act of kindness became a guiding principle for the rest of her career. She later reflected in an interview, "The badge gives us authority, but compassion gives us humanity. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can mean the world." Her colleagues began to see her differently, not just as an officer, but as a leader who embodied both strength and heart. And to Maria herself, Daniel's sunset became a reminder that justice and mercy are not opposites. They can exist together. This story is more than just about a prisoner and a police officer. It's a reminder to all of us, whether we wear a badge, live behind bars, or walk freely in the world, that everyone has a human side. Everyone carries regrets, dreams, and moments they wish they could relive. And sometimes, forgiveness and kindness can echo louder, last longer, and heal deeper than punishment ever could. So, the next time you pause to watch a sunset, remember Daniel Miller, the prisoner who only wanted one last glimpse of freedom, and the brave officer who made it possible. Because in the end, this story wasn't about crime or punishment. It was about dignity, compassion, and the undeniable power of a single wish. And that was the story of Daniel Miller and Officer Maria Sanchez, a story that proves compassion can change everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share with your friends, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss more inspiring stories like this one. Your support helps us bring more real stories of humanity, hope, and lessons that matter. Until next time, keep watching, keep learning, and always remember, kindness costs nothing but means everything.